Hello there and welcome to another video, and in this case it is another Kenny versus Spenny video. I was actually going to do a separate video to this. It was going to be, is Spencer Rice a lolcow, where I'd be comparing Spencer to basically other lolcows like Chris Chan, Daniel Larson and Cyrax. However, as I work on that video, I kind of want to do something different, and in this case I want to review every single episode of Kenny vs. Spenny, starting with Series 1. So, with Series 1 of Kenny vs. Spenny, something to keep in mind is that it is the first series. It is a very weak series, because, as I call it, the first series syndrome. It's something where people just... They're trying to find their footing. They're trying to find where... the right balance is, what makes a good episode, what makes a good series, what works, what doesn't work. And Series 1 is definitely filled with that. I believe Series 1 has the most episodes as well, so we're going to be here for quite a while as I go through every single individual episode of Kenny vs. Spenny. So yeah, sit back, relax, and here are my thoughts on every single episode from Series 1 of Kenny vs. Spenny. Starting off the list is, in fact, the pilot. The pilot is Who Can Gain the Most Weight. Is a very different episode compared to the rest of the show. You can tell this is from the early 2000s. It's got loads of early 2000s flashy gimmickiness and the music that continues to play over and over again. It's quite hilarious, actually. So the idea of this competition is, of course, to gain the most weight, and Spenny's method is to basically do exercise, do fitness and all that, because muscle weighs more than actual fat. Well, Kenny is just eating and eating and eating, and just being a sloth. It's quite an interesting pilot because you see some of the things that are going to affect the show later on. So, for example, Spenny goes on a date with a woman, but on this date, he says some of the most awkward, cringeworthy shit you can imagine. It's stuff that no normal person would ever say, and of course we know later on that Spenny will be just like that. He will be weird and awkward. His conversation's just not normal. No normal person acts like that. Similarly, you got Kenny cheating. Kenny, I forgot what he does. That's right, he gives Spenny laxatives, which causes him to just have diarrhea. It's quite interesting in the sense that you see Kenny almost screw up, one of the pills go flying, and he actually goes in detail that you can't have any evidence lying about. And we do know later on that Kenny does do this sort of stuff quite a lot, in fact. It's it's a near the end, Spenny does get his trainer try and strangle Kenny into submission, but Kenny doesn't submit. He just goes through with it and he wins the competition. The ending, something that's quite interesting, is that the humiliation is done during the credits. Later on, the humiliation will be done literally right at the end of the episodes, and the credits will roll after that. Here, it's done during the credits. You got a little screen, and it's a very simple one. He just reveals the ending of a movie. In this case, it's Unbreakable, and people get really angry with him as a result. It's very interesting also seeing the house they're in. I don't know whether this is correct or not, but if I recall from what some of the fans have pointed out, is that this house was actually in Los Angeles. It wasn't anywhere near Canada, and so what you're seeing is a very bare-bone basic house. It's an apartment actually, and the location is radically different. There's a beach nearby. It's not the house that you expect, but you see the stepping stone, so to speak. You can tell that they would never be able to use this house at all because it's so cramped and small. You only really see 2 rooms. You see the living room and you see the bedrooms, and that's it. So yeah, I think as a pilot this works quite well. It gives you a very good insight into the competition. It's very funny. I will say the music is a little bit overblown in this pilot. It is always in your ears, in your face. It is everywhere. But nonetheless, I think this is a very good stepping stone. Obviously, this isn't technically a part of the entire series, but I'm going to include this here because where else am I going to talk about it? Plus, if I do go through every other series, I'm probably going to have to talk about like the Christmas special, which was at the end of after Series 6, which isn't technically a part of Series 6. And so the first official episode is who can lose the more weight. It's quite funny that they used a weight competition for the pilot and in the first episode, and not only that, the parallels don't just end there, because Spenny also does exercise in this one as well. His tactic is to lose weight by doing exercise, just like his tactic for gaining weight is to do exercise. That's quite funny, actually. Kenny sort of cheats straight away. He puts in this little thing in his hair to try and make him seem a bit more heavier so that he loses a lot more weight compared to Spenny. In this, Kenny meets Goldfield for the first time. This is, setting up a lot of things for the show later on. I like the fact that Kenny's tactic is just to spew every sort of bodily fluid possible to lose weight. And Spenny, he's exercising and spitting into a bucket every 5 seconds. Once again, Kenny, uses laxatives, but this time he uses it on himself, trying to lose weight, which, to be fair, is quite a good tactic. And he also injects, medication into Spenny's food, such as a banana and all that, so that when he is trying to lose weight, instead he's getting constipated, which means he doesn't lose weight. But nonetheless, I think this is a very good start. It's a very simple idea of a competition. Lose weight. Who loses the most weight? And they go through. Something that I forgot to mention is that in the pilot, it went on for a week, whereas now it's only going on for 3 days, which I think works better, because when you really get down to it, if you do something for a long period of time, you won't have enough material there, whereas with 3 days you can concise it to just having it be 3 days. I think this is a very entertaining episode. It's a very good way to start the show, in my opinion. You have a very fun competition, a very simple idea, but also you end up having just a lot of fun along the way. You see Kenny cheating, you see Kenny's malicious plans in place, you see Spenny trying to compete and trying to be the normal person, but not really being that normal. It's just entertaining. I think it does a good job at setting up Kenny versus Spenny, so to speak. If this is your first impression, this is a very good way of getting into gears. It's not going too extreme to the point that there's a massive argument midway through, or there's a fight that takes place. Instead, it's a good way of showing off what's to come. Kenny doesn't take the competition that seriously, and he also wins because he cheats a lot of the time, and he also just thinks that the humiliation is really what means that you win or lose, and he rarely ever gets humiliated. Although Series 1, I will say, is probably the most times you'll see Kenny lose a competition. Every other series, it's maybe twice, 3 times, but in Series 1, he loses quite a few. So yeah, I think this is a very good idea for a competition. I think this is a very good idea for a beginner competition. I will say this, though, the humiliation is a bit lame. Spenny gives an old man a sponge bath. I mean, it's not pleasant, but it's compared to some things you'll see later on, it's pretty lame. And up next is one of the episodes which I put on my top 10 favourite Kenny vs. Spenny episodes list, and this is Who Can Stay Awake Longest. This is just a fantastic episode. I've said it in my best episodes list. I think this was top 5. I don't remember. I think it was maybe 3. No, yes, 3 or 4. It was 3 or 4 if I recall, because I love this episode so much. It is a very, very fair competition. Unlike any other competition in this show, this one is actually quite a fair competition. They're both actually competing, and the concept of it is more or less just simple. There's no massive gimmick. There's no way you can really cheat in this. You just need to find a way to stay awake longer than the other guy, and I think this works out really well. Kenny drinks coffee all the time, so of course he's always alert, but he also tries to like distract himself by throwing eggs off a balcony. Spenny, he gets like little kids involved and tries to get them to make him stay awake all the time, quite alert. Kenny also uses other things like a loud buzzer, which just pisses him off in the end. What else does he do? He also uses an oxygen tank, but that doesn't really last. And like a bright light thing, but I think that was in deleted scenes maybe. But I don't know. This competition, it may not be like the most humorous competition, but it is one of the more tight-knit competitions. And I think that's why it's such a beloved episode, because it is such a simple idea, but it manages to work its way flawlessly, and you see these two actually fighting and competing, something that you don't really see much of in the show at all, because let's be honest, in the show they don't really compete all the time. There's a lot of episodes where one of them tries to forfeit, or one of them doesn't really compete at all and tricks the other. Most of the time it's Kenny doing it to Spenny. For one thing, look at the octopus episode, which I consider the best episode, and a lot of people also consider the best episode. Kenny doesn't really compete in that at all. He gives up almost immediately. But the humour comes from him messing around with Spenny. Whereas this episode is the opposite. This is all competition, and it's still very interesting. It's still very, you want to know how these two are able to last. And there's this one moment where Kenny, is distraught because he actually wants to go to bed. It is just painful. I think he said in the commentary, this is like one of the most painful episodes to do, because you have to stay awake, you have to stay active, and you're constantly trying to fall asleep. And the crew actually did fall asleep, which is why Kenny had to randomly grab a camera to film a sleeping Spenny at one point, because, well, he couldn't stay awake the longest. But 4 days of being awake, it must do something to you. It must do something. I think this is a fantastic episode. It's one of the few episodes where it is a fair competition, where both are trying to compete with each other, and it's quite a tight-knit competition at the same time. It's a really, really, really good episode. One of my favorites by a long shot. I found out the other day that, according to Kenny, in one of the commentaries, he said that this competition is used for like the pilot basis of the international Kenny versus Spenny shows. The ones which I don't think anyone really talks about or knows about. The ones like the Colombian one, Indian one, and all that shit. This is always used as like the first one, because it is a simple idea, but it can be such a stress-inducing, you have to put your effort, you gotta put a lot of effort in to do this competition. Very good episode. I think the humiliation here is quite funny at the same time. This is not necessarily the best humiliation, but it is still a quite good humiliation. I think it's much better than the previous episode for sure. So after 2 really good episodes, the second one in particular being absolutely fantastic, we now take a step way down in quality. This is Who is the Better Chef. I put this as number 10 on the worst Kenny versus Spenny list, mainly because I didn't like this episode. I still don't like this episode. I think it's still quite a crap episode, even after rewatching it for this video. I don't know, this is just still a really shit episode. However, would I put it in my top 10 worst episodes list? No, I wouldn't. I would actually remove it from the 10th spot, because I think there are a lot of other episodes which I think are far worse, like who do black people like more. I think that is far worse upon retrospect. But I still think this is a bad episode. I still think this would probably be in like top 15 worst, episodes. The reason why, and I said this in my 10 best and 10 worst episodes lists, is that the worst episodes for me are the ones that feel staged. And this one feels staged in the sense that, Spenny is trying to cheat. He says right at the beginning, to his mother, Kenny is always cheating. I think I should be able to cheat. And this time he's going to try and cheat. And it feels very formulaic and very storytelly, so to speak. Which, for a show that's trying to be a reality show where everything is, 100% legitimate and, not fake at all, that feels fake. I'm sorry, it feels fake. Also, this is the third episode. Kenny's only cheated twice if you count the pilot. But that was like a few years ago. So my assumption is this is an episode that was probably filmed like much later on, but they've moved it up to the third place because they wanted to show that Spenny can cheat in these competitions as well, although he rarely ever does. The only other times I can think of is like commercial, for example. But I think what else makes this a really disappointing bad episode is the fact that this episode had potential. Like, the idea of these two having like a cook-off competition, I think is quite a good idea. I think this is a very well thought of idea. I think this could have worked out really well. But instead, the execution is just so boring. You know, it's disappointingly boring. You know, Spenny has this radio in his, hat to try and help him, cook these dishes, but he can't cook for shit. Kenny knows how to cook, he knows how to cook, so he's already at an advantage. But there's very few Kenny moments in this episode. That's another thing, and it's been said quite a few times by a lot of fans. Things that are more centered towards Spenny is a lot more boring than things centered around Kenny. Spenny is not very entertaining. One very good example is the Squeeze More Boobs competition. Spenny's side of things is so cringeworthy and so unwatchable, you just want to skip over it. Whereas with Kenny, it's a lot more fun and hilarious and, quite ingenious, the plans that he has. And so it's a similar case here where, it would have been more interesting to see Kenny's point of view than Spenny's, because Spenny is just not as entertaining. And the competition, despite it being quite a good idea, quite good a competition idea, it just falls flat on its face. And make matters worse, it feels somewhat staged with the whole, formulaic, this time the straight man is cheating sort of idea. I know it's probably not staged. Like I said, I think this probably was filmed much later on, but I don't know. It's just such a disappointing episode. It's such a step down compared to the previous episode that it just feels like a big blemish. Next up is Who Can Stand Up the Longest. Now, Who Can Stand Up the Longest is an episode that initially I never really thought that much of. However, there's a YouTuber online who's called Kenny vs. Spenny Analysis, and he actually went into quite a bit of detail about this particular episode. And I've come to appreciate it a lot more, and I think this is quite a good episode, all things considered. This is sort of like a prototype Stain episode in the sense that Kenny exploits the rules. Kenny exploits the idea that these rules don't really, feel well thought of and well established. So he's just gonna basically go ahead and make up his own rules, so to speak, and it of course pisses off Spenny along the way. They both ask experts, so to speak, what's standing? Does this count as standing? Does this count as standing? And does this count as standing? And of course, everyone has different opinions. Spenny even asks a bloody hot dog guy, and and eventually culminates into this thing in the bedroom where Kenny, he's using this sort of gymnastic rope thing in his bedroom, and he's sort of hanging himself. But Spenny thinks that's cheating. He then gets his former boss, as it turns out, because he used to work for this guy, to come up with a idea of what the fuck is this? Is this cheating? Is this not cheating? And of course, the guy, I forgot his name, the most learned man, he realizes, Kenny's game here. He realizes that Spenny is trying desperately to get him on his side, but of course, Kenny is always 2 steps ahead, and at the end of the day, he says, well, it's up to interpretation. Both of you haven't really come up with a referee or rule system, so now you're both coming out with your own rules, saying this is standing, and of course, this ends up having an impact to later seasons, later episodes as well. They need to have rules, they need to have some sort of established guidelines on what is and what isn't allowed. And so, in many ways, this episode is a very important episode in Kenny versus Spenny, because it is the episode that introduces the idea we need guidelines, we need rules. Eventually, they both can't come up with an agreement, so they decide who can stand the longest on one spot. And they're not allowed to move at all. They have to stand face to face. Kenny, of course, prior to this little end competition, put in itching powder on where Spenny's spot is. So, of course, they stand with their feet face to face. But, of course, Spenny is getting very itchy, very irritated. And he steps off and he can't handle it. He has to itch his foot. Kenny wins through cheating, of course. So Kenny then punishes Spenny by getting Spenny to bite off a piece of Kenny's toenail. And he also spits into the mouthwash that Spenny uses after biting the toenail. It's brutal humiliation for this episode. But I think this is a very highly entertaining episode. A much better episode than the previous one. However, we do then have the next episode. Who Can Sit on a Cow the Longest is probably the most bizarre episode of the show. It's weird because in many ways this episode should be one of the worst episodes, because nothing really happens at all until the very end. And at the same time, I've looked on other people's lists and this one never seems to appear on their worst lists. Kenny gets Spenny a cow, which is already very skittish. And Kenny then spends the whole time just making cow jokes. He goes and sits on a brass bull at one point. The idea is they're going to both come on and sit on a cow. Whoever lasts the longest wins. Very simple idea, but the problem is you need to fill in 20 odd minutes worth of episode content for this very short, brief experience. So, of course, the episode ends up being a very long and drawn out episode where there's not really an awful lot happening. And this is a problem which Series 1 has a lot of, and that is there's a lot of episodes which are just really boring. There's not a lot happening. So, of course, you're waiting for something to happen for the ending, and then it happens and it's okay. Yeah, the main competition is right at the end. The rest of the episode is just filler, so to speak. I will say, I do think it's hilarious seeing Spenny freak out over cows, It's like those stories from World War II of, city children coming over to the countryside and never seeing any of these animals and freaking the fuck out. It's just like that. Spenny is freaking the fuck out over these cows. He's also freaking out over the fact that he might get dirty, which, ironically, of course, his humiliation is being sprayed in with cow manure. Which, Spenny loses this one as well. Kenny cheats by just throwing this, this toy dog at the cow, and the cow freaks out and Spenny gets thrown off. A very funny ending, I won't lie, and the humiliation is pretty good as well. But for an episode, the problem is this is an episode where it needed to have a lot more going for it, and it didn't really have a lot of it going for it. It's an episode which has an idea which can only really work in maybe 5 minutes max, and it can't really work longer than that. It just struggles, and we see in this episode that they did struggle to fill up the time. They just spent most of it just dawdling and making jokes here and there. It's one of those Series 1 boring episodes which have been lost to time, for very good reason. Who is the sanest? Now, psychiatric evaluation episodes, they can work. Look at Dirty Sanchez, for example. They have an episode which is all about psychiatrically evaluating each member of the boys, and I think that's a very funny episode. It's quite interesting. It's quite insightful. Kenny vs. Spenny, unfortunately, doesn't succeed in this. For one thing, it happens way too early. This is the 6th episode. If you want to do an episode like this, you should have done it near towards the end. Maybe, have highlights of the previous episodes, previous shows, and, you would have seen, okay, maybe you could have had a better judgment of like the characters, or people I should say, not characters. Kenny tries various ways to get Spenny upset every time. I guess that's quite entertaining, the restaurant scene in particular. Just seeing this psychopath do this stuff. But at the same time, it's a very boring episode. Like, it's amazing rewatching this, how quickly the show, goes by. Spenny wins the competition. Three of the 4 doctors went for him, which I do wonder what would have happened if this was a later on episode. Maybe if it was series 6, for example, what the hell would be the judgment there? Because I can guarantee you that Spenny probably would not win. But yeah, like, it's just a very boring episode. Again, this is not very entertaining. It's arguably more boring than the cow episode, because at least the cow episode had some fun, had a fun ending and a brilliant humiliation. This one just isn't. It's a very slow pace. It's a slow burner episode, and it would have worked if it was a later episode and it would have had a lot more going for it, but because it isn't, and because it's quite early on, it just doesn't work. It falls flat on its face. Very tedious episode overall. I will say this, the humiliation is pretty entertaining. Kenny being forced to streak across the street. I think that's quite funny. But yeah, like, this is Spenny's first win, and it's kind of sets a precedent to all the other Spenny wins, in the sense that Spenny is a very fucking boring person, and when he wins, it sucks. It sucks a lot of dick. Up next is Who Can Earn the Most Money in 3 days. This is quite an interesting episode because, once again, this is a very fair competition. Both men are trying their best to earn the most money. And throughout this episode, you're seeing Kenny's point of view of him basically just earning money like it's nothing. And he's very joyful, very gleeful about it. Whereas Spenny, he's struggling to do anything. Like, he tries doing art. It isn't very popular. No one likes it. He tries doing all sorts of little jobs here and there. It doesn't work. He bets all his money at the end on a race, and that is what makes him win. And it's, it really is. It's an episode that comes down to luck, really, because Spenny, if he betted on the wrong horse, he would have lost. But instead, he betted on the right horse and he won. And Kenny, despite the fact that he made a lot of money, did all this stuff, he fucks up because he ends up, paying for advertisements for the show. And unfortunately, he has to pay half of it to Spenny legally. So, of course, even despite the fact that he did all this, he has to pay money for that, and he also had to pay money for the advertisements in the first place, meaning that he gets less and less and less each time. So, of course, it comes down to luck, and it's a very interesting it's a really interesting competition overall. I don't know why I'm saying conversation so many times. Competition overall, I think it's a competition that goes down to luck at the end of the day. It's a competition that not only goes down with luck, but it also goes down with seeing how fair a competition can be when both men are forced to compete and actually do things their own way, rather than one trying to cheat against the other. Which, unfortunately for Kenny, didn't really work out in the end. Whereas Spenny, it was really just a stroke of luck. So Spenny wins, and he does humiliation, which is quite brutal. He forces Kenny to drink a coffee that is brewed with Spenny's underwear, which is disgusting. It's been said many times that a lot of Spenny's humiliations are very, dare I say, sexual fetishes, and they really are. Like, a lot of them truly are like that, and it makes you wonder about Spenny. Makes you really wonder. Who Does She Like Better is a competition which I actually had on my runners-up in terms of the best of episodes list, because this is such a good fucking episode. It's quite funny because of all the Who Does X Like Better episodes, they did it right the first time with Who Does She Like Better. This competition is very interesting in one aspect, and that is Spenny would have lost even despite the fact that Kenny cheats in this. So what I mean by that is basically Kenny and Spenny, they go on a date with this girl and they let her decide who is better. Kenny's date goes pretty much by standards, everything is fine, etc, etc. But before Spenny has a chance to go out with the girl, Kenny arranges a decoy. He gets a fake girl who is, no matter what, going to choose Kenny at the end, even if she has a great time with Spenny. Similarly, the real girl has been set up with a fake Spenny, who is like this grotesque, ugly human being, this vulgar creature who ends up being more approachable than Spenny in real life. But the reason why this episode is quite funny is the fact that Spenny would have lost anyway, and it's because of Spenny's fucking attitude to everything. So here, with the decoys, Spenny gets a guy to sing a song how he's much better than Kenny and all that. But that's not the real juicy part. The juicy part comes much later on with them having their little dinner together at home, and you have Spenny basically going on an unhinged rant about Kenny. He continues to yell about, he belittles Kenny, and the decoy says, well, Kenny wasn't that bad, etc, etc. And of course, Spenny just continues. He says, well, he's worse than me, blah, blah, blah. It's this constant ranting and raving. It's this constant, belittling of his partner in crime, so to speak. All because he doesn't want him to win. And, he just continues to talk about, Kenny and bitch about Kenny. He then, feeds the dog some chocolate as well, which, chocolate is poisonous to dogs. And he then rants at the woman, the decoy. It says, oh, well, I did a little bit. I mean, well, this is ridiculous, etc. It's amazing, how even if the girls didn't get swapped, even if the dates didn't get swapped, Spenny would have fucking lost. He is such an arrogant, self-centered prick that he genuinely thinks that, he genuinely thinks that ranting and raving about your friend is really interesting to a girl. He thinks that getting some old guy on the streets to sing a song about how much better he is than the other guy is enough to please a girl. It's amazing how he manages to fuck things up. He rages at her because she points out that chocolate is not allowed for dogs. So, the funny thing is he would have fucked up this episode no matter what, and Kenny would have won no matter what, because Spenny is so much of an embarrassing... I do wonder sometimes if Spenny is autistic, because he does not act like a normal person. He acts so bizarre and so socially awkward, and it's just baffling how socially awkward he is. This is the reason why I wanted to do this is Spenny a lolcow video, because he genuinely has a lot of the traits of a lolcow, and arguably he is, because for fuck's sake, even today he blocks people on social media if they have a different political opinion to him. He goes on unhinged political rants. There's that one fucking interview where he randomly starts saying some random political number that no one gives two shits about, because he's very politically centered, minded, I should say. He's so bizarre, and yet here he is somehow thinking that this is what a woman, if he went on a date with, would want to hear. Obviously Kenny cheats and wins. The real date would obviously pick him, because the other Spenny the fake Spenny is grotesque, although I like you much better than the real Spenny. Whereas the fake decoy girlfriend, what makes me laugh is that I bet you she would have picked Kenny anyway, because it's Spenny fucks up, and it's been said, if you look on the comment section on this particular episode, almost everyone has the same thoughts and feelings. Like, Spenny would have lost, regardless, because he just cannot keep his personal feelings to himself. He cannot, let the rivalry with Kenny, just die out a little, for this one moment. No, he has to rage on about it. He has to, be argumentative, etc. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. The humiliation, Spenny receives a beating from a transvestite, and yeah, it's pretty funny. This is such a great episode. There's a reason why I put this in my runners-up in terms of the best episodes list, because this is a really good episode, and it's one of those examples where it worked the first time, yet every other time it just doesn't work at all. The who does X like better. This is such a good gold standard that the rest of them just fall flat on their face afterwards, which really sucks. But this is just a great episode, really funny, highly entertaining, and I do wonder what would have happened if Kenny didn't bother cheating, because I bet you he still would have won, because Spenny is such a fuck up. Up next is Who Can Stay Blindfolded the Longest. This episode is another really entertaining episode. This is another one which I had on my runners-up for the best episodes list, because it is just hilarious. This is like the octopus episode later on, in the sense that Kenny immediately just forfeits the competition. He doesn't do it at all. But what makes it so entertaining is what he does to Spenny. So, whilst I do like the two of them competing in competitions, I don't mind it when Kenny doesn't bother doing it and fucks around with Spenny the whole episode. Like the beer episode, for example, he doesn't drink, alcoholic beer, he drinks fake beer, and Spenny gets drunk and Spenny just humiliates himself, more or less. Octopus, he immediately takes the octopus off his head. He cuts off the tentacles, sews them onto the hat so it looks like he's got it under his hat. He then drugs Spenny with LSD. This episode, he doesn't bother putting on the blindfolds. And Spenny is blindfolded. He actually takes the competition seriously. He's actually going through with this. And he just gets tortured. And he looks like a complete tool at the same time, This big, almost hockey gear that he's wearing so he can protect himself. Kenny does the ingenious move of pretending to have a friend over to fuck around with Spenny so that, he doesn't get blamed for fucking around with Spenny. Of course, it's all Kenny, really. Pardon. Sorry about the cough. But Kenny... my God, Kenny... The one bit which really gets to me, the bit that makes me laugh every time is it's on the third day, I think it is, or something, and Spenny wakes up and he just says, I just know I'm going to get tortured. I just know things are going to happen to me. And, he's got all this black marker all over him, these stickers placed all over his shirt. He looks so defeated, yet here he is still trying to, compete in this competition. It's absolutely hilarious. It really is hilarious. And it's just it also highlights another problem in the show, or at least in series 1, and that is the house. The house in series 1 was very small and tight, and you can see it definitely when Spenny is whacking his stick about, and the cameramen have to lunge backwards because he's just smashing everything to pieces. And at one point he smashes up a lamp, and he then screams, "Oh great, there's glass on the ground," even though he caused it. This is also the first appearance of Silencio, one of Kenny's many alter egos, one of Kenny's many costumes. This basically a Mexican mask who gets Silencio, despite the fact that Silencio basically means silence. So really what he's doing is just saying, I'm silent. Which, yeah, I mean, who cares? But really, this is just an entertaining episode. And I think the way that Kenny orchestrates Spenny's loss is brilliant. Like, the fact that he gets like a third pair of these things, he puts on his pair, he places it on the sofa so that Spenny grabs it and thinks, oh my god, Kenny's taking it off. I've won. And of course he then goes upstairs and sees that Kenny has his on. He hasn't really. And yeah, I will say this, so the humiliation is kind of lame. Like, the humiliation is very lame. It's just Spenny enduring Kenny's bad breath for a minute. I mean, it's not bad, but it's just very lame compared to the others. Regardless, I think this is a fantastic episode. There's a reason why a lot of people love this episode, why this is, one of the few episodes I have as a commentary. I'm so curious of what Spenny's reaction was when he saw this in the editing room, or when he saw it when it got released, with him being tricked this entire time, because it must have been fucking explosive. I love this episode. It's such a great episode. So yeah, shame about the next one. Who can win a beauty pageant? I actually kept mistaking this one for another episode that's later on in this series, which is the fashion show one. For some reason, I kept confusing these two, but I've actually got the official description here. Basically, this one is both Kenny and Spenny. They have to do a beauty pageant. Not really a beauty pageant. It's really just a talent show. Kenny thinks that he's going to, by reading out a poem and claiming that it's his real work, that's going to work. While Spenny, he's actually going to try and do like a tap dancing routine and entertain the judges. Kenny tries to ruin Spenny's chances. He swaps out the shoes with smaller pair, which can't fit, and he tries to really fuck over Spenny. Ultimately, though, it doesn't go according to plan, and Spenny wins regardless. And once again, we get a humiliation, which is very fetish-esque from Spenny, in which Kenny is walking like a dog. He's leashed and walked by Spenny because he's like a dog. Like I said it before, a lot of Spenny's humiliations are very fetish orientated, which says a lot about the person rather than the person being humiliated. As for this particular competition, it's all right, I guess. The idea behind it is okay. They're forced to dress up into 3 different attires, like a smart one, a casual one, etc. And then, they have to do like a talent, so the poem or the tap dancing. Kenny, I feel like Kenny should have done a lot more to fuck over Spenny, really. Like, he does so in other episodes, especially ones later on in this particular series. Whereas this episode, he doesn't really do that all that much. He just sort of goes, and swaps the shoes around. That's about it. Imagine if he did something else, like put itching pad, put like something, in his clothing or something that make him squirm. I don't know, give him diarrhea with laxatives, something like that. But he doesn't really go that far. The episode itself is very okay-ish. It's not very entertaining. It's not very interesting. It's a very forgettable episode, actually. And this is another one of those Series 1 forgettable episodes where not a lot really is that entertaining or happens until the very end, and that's about it. So yeah, overall, Beauty Pageant is forgettable. It's a very forgettable episode. I don't really have much to talk about. Even when I was rewatching it, I just knew that I didn't really have much to talk about because there's not really much to say. Very weak episode, honestly. Not a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination. This isn't like a god-awful, dreadful episode. It's a weak episode, It's a boring one. Up next is who can win a series of mini competitions. Now, this competition idea is another example of the first time they did it, it was so good. Why did they bother doing it again? In this case, I'm referring to the god-awful episode known as Who Has the Biggest Balls? That dreadful piece of shit of an episode. They did it right the first time around. Why did they try doing it a second time around and doing it far worse? This is such a simple idea. Kenny and Spenny, they do a series of mini comps. Whoever does better wins. It's simple as that. Of course, Kenny does cheat on a few occasions. Sometimes he just kind of forfeits. Like, he's not going to run up the CN Tower, for example. something that I did find quite interesting about this particular episode is that it has quite a few deleted scenes and deleted competitions, which they replaced with other ones, such as the marshmallow eating, to try and get an evenly matched scorecard. But basically, there was two competitions. One that was won by Kenny, the other that was won by Spenny. So, of course, it wouldn't have changed the results at all in this. Kenny, in one of them, was going to spit a grape from the CN Tower. However, it got cut, and the reason why it got cut was most likely because it's evidence of them doing a crime. You can't spit or throw stuff off a tall building. I mean, that's just, it's obvious. Even if it was just a grape, he would have gone into a lot of trouble and fined for it, and they don't really have that money to, sort that shit out. The other one was a pinball one, which I assume was just removed because it was just not very interesting. Basically, Spenny got a higher score than Kenny, that was it. So yeah, it's quite interesting that there were some that were removed from this particular episode. But aside from that, I think it's just such a fun episode, really. It's just simple, short, competitions, and they both go ahead and just fuck around for the whole duration. And we see, like, how each of them are skilled in certain aspects. Like, Kenny is better at doing things like gum or wrestling with Spenny. But Spenny is much more athletic, so he's able to do, like, 100-meter dash, not 100-mile, Jesus. 100-meter dash. And, he's also very capable of running up a tall flight of stairs at the CN Tower, but at the same time, he can't stuff things down his mouth like Kenny can. But regardless, it's very interesting seeing how both of them are good at some things and bad at other things. It really is like a test of your skills, which, shows off whose skill is better than others. In terms of humiliation, this one is really lame. Kenny is just forced to walk up the CN Tower, which, by the way, Spenny won this one by 1 single point. Fair dues. Once again, it's a very fair competition. It's a fair competition in the sense that we see just how, both of them are able to do these things rather than, one of them just dominating the other one, or, one's cheating over the other one and wins regardless, which, to be fair, in the deleted scene with the grape, technically Kenny did cheat in that. But it would be interesting if those clips ever resurface. They are known to exist, but unfortunately are currently lost, which is very interesting to think about. So yeah, grape spitting and pinball is currently missing in terms of this episode, so it's probably the only Kenny versus Spenny episode with lost media attached to it, which is insightful, to say the very least. Up next is who can put on a better fashion show. Kenny wins this pretty effortlessly, really. I like how Kenny just sort of knows how the fashion world works. He just puts on, like, the most ridiculous bullshit possible, and presto, it works, Whereas Spenny, when I was talking about how Spenny, in one interview and even on social media, like, goes on to random political rants that no one gives two shits about. Well, this is one of them. He thinks that by having flags of the world and telling, like, some, about how we can all be peaceful, man, and all that shit is very interesting. One of them, which is very topical given the current situation in Gaza, is Israel and the Palestine flag on both sides of a tie. Oh boy. It's like, I'd love to see if Spenny would do that again. Which is hilarious to think about. He also does, like, a American French flag, because they're both best buddies in the whole world. And UK and Canada. I don't remember what the other ones were. But what makes this episode quite entertaining is just seeing how bad things go for Spenny. Like, this entire episode, like, is from the get-go, it's obvious, like, Kenny's gonna win this. Like, Kenny, and I think the reason why it doesn't show Kenny that much in this episode is because it's kind of boring with Kenny, ironically. Like, Kenny is, like, he already knows how to stylize things and get things, like, up and ready. He's more of a people's person, Spenny is, and as a result, Spenny is so socially awkward and fucking weird that he thinks that this is what the fashion world needs, when really they don't give two fucks. And so Kenny, Spenny, what makes this quite entertaining is seeing how bad things go for Spenny. Like, for one thing, he's in, like, the living room of the house, which is already really tight, and it has to house, like, 6 odd people, bunch of judges, the models and all that. And, of course, Spenny announcing what each of these, nation flag representative stuff is. Also, he does this for men, like, compared to Kenny, which does it for women, which, let's be honest now, fashion is more for women, and it's technically going to go in that favour, whereas with men it's less so, which is quite funny to think about, especially given the jokes about Spenny's sexuality, but I digress. But things go from bad for worse. Not only does he have this cheap, like, setup in the living room, something that, like, a child would do if they were doing, like, some stupid little fashion show, but he then proceeds to have several of his male models just walk out on him. Like, they like, to be fair, like, they got a job to do, and they walk out. So, to be fair to Spenny, they're fucking pussies, let's be honest. But it's hilarious to see Spenny suffer, so, it's a win-win situation. So Spenny gets some random fucking people off the streets to do it. And it's hilarious seeing this, like, shaggy, obviously not very presentable male come in with, like, a fucking tie on around, and it's just obvious from the start that Spenny fucking loses. And in the humiliation, we get Spenny wear one of Kenny's bikini creations in the streets, and yeah, it's like even when the judges say to Spenny and Kenny, for that matter, like, their critiques, like, they even say, like, Spenny's just is not what anyone would ask for at all. Like, no one cares, no one gives two shits. Like, let's be perfectly fucking honest, who in the fashion world gives two fine fucks about anything political, like, at all? And Spenny thinks that they do. It's, once again, it's one of those signs of obvious fucking, like, social awkwardness that he has. But I will say this, humiliation is quite funny, and it's amazing that Spenny just does it with a straight face without freaking out. Like, maybe he's used to it. So yeah, this is a surprisingly entertaining episode, despite the fact that fashion is just such a boring concept. This actually manages to be entertaining only because of how bad Spenny's luck is in this. Who Can Stay Handcuffed the Longest is perhaps one of the most famous episodes in this show's history, and for very good reason. The concept itself is actually quite an entertaining concept. They basically have to be handcuffed to each other, which means they have to go everywhere with each other, and they have to do basically everything to each other. But this also means that both Spenny and Kenny have to deal with each other, and of course Kenny knows how to push all Spenny's buttons, but Spenny tries to come prepared and tries to be just as annoying back. He's got this kazoo, which is really friggin' annoying. Kenny, uses his breath and other things to just piss Spenny off. But Spenny being, I have to win the competition. I have to win the competition no matter what. He's very adamant just to stay put. And so Kenny tries to have this big party, which, Spenny hates, but he's forced to be there anyway. But then we get onto the bit which perhaps makes this episode very famous. Wolffish. Wolffish is a man who Spenny owes money to, and I forgot what the actual story is. There is a true story, and but basically it was I think it was when they were doing their pitched film, and Wolffish donated like several thousands to Spenny, but Spenny proceeded to not pay him back. And basically Wolffish, well, I think it's something along the lines of Wolffish wanted to withdraw from the project, so he wanted his money back. Spenny was adamant not to give it back. So that's what created that problem. So Spenny is then tortured for the rest of the episode with Wolffish, but, and this is a big but, it actually manages to backfire on Kenny, because Kenny, you know, he gets annoyed as well. He genuinely gets pissed off. And, you know, you listen to the commentary of this episode, you know, you find out that Wolffish is really like this. He really is this annoying human being that you just want to strangle to death. You know, it's like he is this painful to be around. But it does create great entertainment nonetheless. Spenny, he is so destroyed by the end of this that he just agrees to take off the handcuffs, even though, you know, Kenny obviously pretends that he wants it taken off. Spenny just accepts the loss, and yeah, the humiliation is him picking up women with a herpes sore on his face, which it just wasn't as entertaining as it could have been. It's not really a great humiliation, but you know, it's decent. This episode, of course, is very famous, very infamous. I really like this episode. I know some people find it quite annoying, which is very understandable because Wolffish is a very annoying human being. That said, I still think this is a very entertaining episode. There's a reason why this is one of the most famous episodes in the show's history, why it still has a lasting legacy compared to a lot of other episodes. Very good episode. Very, very good episode. Who can put on the best concert? Oh boy, I love the scheme that Kenny comes up with this episode. So Kenny immediately, you know, he tries to win the judges' hearts by having a children's choir because, you know, imagine if they say something nasty about the children and they go for Spenny and his big rock band. That would be horrible. But to double down on that, ensuring that he has victory, he goes to the editing suite and he picks out some previous film footage of Spenny talking, and he tries to manipulate it so that Spenny is saying something along the lines of, you know, don't come in, don't, you know, come tomorrow, it's over, blah, 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 to the band members, because Spenny, like the fucking idiot that he is, decides to leave vital information that has the band members' addresses and phone numbers. So, of course, Kenny grabs all that, sends a fake call over to Spenny, from Spenny, resulting in the band not turning up on the day. And it is hilarious seeing the reaction. To give credit where credit due, Spenny's song isn't that bad either. It's kind of like a generic sort of 90s, sort of early 2000s song, which you'd probably hear once and never hear again. But, you know, and it's just hilarious knowing what Kenny does. And the best part is at the concert, you know, he starts freaking out. He's pacing up and down. He's like, where's my band? Where's my band? He then calls them and he even finds out that he supposedly told them not to come. And of course, it's too late. Kenny has his little concert with all the children saying, you know, there should be peace in the world and all the children suffering, blah, blah, blah. You know, the generic crap, which even, like, Kenny, you know, acknowledges as generic crap. Whereas Spenny, he's forced to do it on stage on his own. And boy, that must have been embarrassing. And yeah, Spenny loses, obviously 3-0. Kenny wins cheating. Spenny is then forced to stand in the middle of the street in costume and sing Kenny's song. And I just think this is such a cruel but hilarious episode. I think the idea of Kenny just going into the editing suite and cleverly manipulating the sounds to make it seem like Spenny is telling his band to just not show up, etc. Very good episode. Fantastic episode. I love this episode a lot. A really good one. It may not be one of the best, obviously, overall, but it is certainly one of the better Series 1 episodes, and really hilarious. The scheme itself is great. Humiliation sucks, though, I will say. The humiliation is not very good, but that doesn't change the fact that this is such a malicious scheme from Kenny, and it is probably one of his best. Up next is an episode which I wish I put on my top 10 best Kenny versus Spenny episodes list, because it's so fucking good. This is Who is the Better Parent? This episode, holy shit, this episode. Staying Awake may be my favourite of this series, but this might be my second favourite of series 1. This episode involves Kenny and Spenny having a baby doll, those realistic baby dolls that scream and cry if you don't, treat it right, if you don't feed it, you pamper it, etc. And Kenny gets a wonderful idea almost immediately, and this wonderful idea comes from the doctors who give them the dolls. And the doctors say, if you there's batteries at the back, if you do this, you might end up killing it. And, they'll test it after, several days, how well you've treated your baby doll. And Kenny gets this wonderful idea, and, immediately he says that he's not going to look after this thing. And he just brutalizes and beats up this doll. You hear it scream out in pain as he snaps its neck and breaks it at one point. All in an effort to kill it. He wants to kill the baby and replace it with Spenny's baby. I love the scheme. I love it. And, I love how this whole episode builds up to this moment. And even then, there's this idea that this plan could completely fall flat on its face, because there's a chance that Spenny might wake up. There's a chance that Spenny might walk upstairs and hear what all that loud screaming is about. He even says at one point, he can hear all the noises upstairs. He could have easily walked up, seen what was happening, and put 2 to 2 together. Luckily for Kenny, this doesn't happen. And, he does bungee jumping with the baby. He does all this other stuff. A fun fact about this episode is, according to the commentary, this episode was likely the cause of Series 1 being cancelled and the show not getting renewed on the same network and being forced to move over to a different network. Because apparently a lot of people, a lot of women in particular, got upset over the baby doll being abused. A baby doll being the key word there. There's no way Kenny would have abused a real baby. Let's be perfectly honest, He's got 3 kids of his own anyway, so it's why would he ever, do such a thing? But, of course, people, for some reason, associated it with a real baby, and, yeah. Which does make it even funnier in hindsight. This entire episode is just hilarious. You see Spenny as well, trying to treat the baby doll as an actual person, and he's actually being very serious about it. And to add to this, you would then have moments Spenny going to all these mums doing exercise with their babies nearby. It's really weird and awkward. I'm surprised he never got in trouble, at all. It's the type of thing it's the type of thing that a paedophile would do, let's be honest. Yeah. But, so Spenny takes it all way too seriously, as per usual. Kenny doesn't give 2 shits. And things get a little bit desperate later on, because despite the fact that Kenny's plan is to kill the baby doll so that he swaps it with Spenny's doll, Kenny's actually struggling. He's struggling to kill this thing because it doesn't fucking die. And so, he tries to open up the back to disable the batteries and use a kill switch, and he does so. He kills it. Once it's dead, comes probably the trickiest part of the operation, in the sense that he needs to swap it out with Spenny's baby. But, of course, these babies, they cry as soon as you nudge them slightly. And so he has to very quietly sneak in, swap the baby, swap the clothing at the same time, while Spenny's right there asleep. And, it's amazing just how close this competition could have actually been. Kenny could have lost this. As I already said, Kenny could have lost this. He could have lost it. from Spenny just simply walking upstairs and hearing all the commotion, seeing the baby parts all over the place and the broken fucking neck. You know, he could have walked into the park and seen the fucking bungee jumping baby. He could have seen, you know, the crows being like eating seeds off of the baby's doll. He could have seen, you know, he could have woken up at this moment, and he doesn't. And it's just like, oh, it's like all the dominoes are in line and they all fall over one after the other, and it works so perfectly well that Spenny doesn't wake up. The babies have been swapped. Kenny now has Spenny's baby. Spenny now has Kenny's baby, which is dead. We then get to the bit at the end where the doctors do like an operation. It's quite funny though, because the doctor says like, oh wow, you forgot to do all this, and Spenny is like flabbergasted that Kenny would abuse his baby like this, even though technically speaking this is what Spenny did to the baby, which makes me dread what the hell he did to his daughters when they were, you know, when they were born. Like, did he do the same thing then? Forget to feed them and change them and all that shit. Jeez. Although I don't think any of his children are legally allowed near him, which is quite funny. Not really funny, actually. It's quite sad for Spenny, but you know. But I digress. And then, of course, the doctor then goes to the Kenny baby, which is Spenny's now. And I will say this is the only bit of the entire episode which I think is really weird. And that is the doctor, she looks like she's about to cry. Like, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but she looks like she's about to cry. She's like sniffling and her voice sounds like it's cracking over the fact that this baby doll is dead. Like, she's checking it and she says, yeah, this baby is dead. She sounds like she's about to cry because a fucking baby doll is dead. And I just love hearing Spenny's reaction, like he's killed the baby, even though Kenny did it. And it's, oh, I want to know what his reaction was, you know, because of that. Would have been hilarious. But yeah, that was who is the better parent. The humiliation, Spenny is forced to dress up as baby. Very weird, very weird. Like I was talking about fetishists earlier. Arguably this one is. The worst part is nowadays this probably wouldn't be seen as stupid or bad or humiliating because there are sick fucks out there, especially in Canada. But I digress. Fantastic episode. Like I feel guilty not putting this in the best episode list because this is such a good episode. But you know, it's just beautiful. It is beautiful. It's hilarious. It is funny as fuck, and was probably the cause of Series 1 being cancelled. Up next is Who Do Kids Like More? This is a really weird episode ordering, I will say, because you have parent with babies, with the baby, and then you have this one afterwards. Like, I don't really, like, I do wonder if they did this on purpose to have, like, two child-centered episodes, one after the other. Like, one where Kenny abuses a baby doll, and the other one where Kenny, you know, treats them to, like, the greatest day on earth, you know. So this one is another example of Spenny would have lost regardless, at least in my opinion it is, because yeah, well, I'll get into it later. So basically in this, Kenny and Spenny, they have a bunch of kids, 7 of them in particular, and they basically have to entertain these children, be the one that they like. Kenny, you know, he just gives them everything they want. They go to a Chuck E. Cheese, I think that's what they're called in Canada, maybe. Chuck E. Cheese, they have pizza, they have all the sweets in the world, they have all the ice cream in the world, they have, you know, watch whatever the hell they want, they want to do whatever they want, draw shit, whatever. You know, he is full on, kids have unlimited freedom to have fun. However, he also has this little present that he's keeping at the end. The present, however, has nothing in there. He's going to trick the kids into thinking there's some big present if they vote him. And yeah, he doesn't actually have anything. Of course, Kenny being Kenny, he does grow a bit of a soft spot and thinks, you know, we really need to give these kids something because, you know, it's not nice being, you know, a dickhead towards children. That's just too far. I love that about Kenny. I love how Kenny, like, you know, he'll do all these things to Spenny, do these, you know, he makes some of these jokes about with other people, like his mother, for example. But, you know, sometimes, you know, he won't go that far. Like, he won't ever go that far when it comes to children, for example, which is hilarious because he also uses them for his own malicious schemes as well. And so, of course, second half of the day, the kids have to go with Spenny. Thankfully, none of them were raped, but I'm sorry to sound like Kenny, but basically, Spenny has this like adventure like thing that day out they do. They go off to find treasure, and they find some socks, and they give it to a pirate. The pirate comes out and scares them, and actually causes one of them to cry. Kenny, you know, Spenny, I mean, is trying to take them all over the place. You know, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go next? And yeah, Spenny obviously loses. Although saying that, one little girl does vote for Spenny, which is quite nice for Spenny. But they all vote for Kenny. Yeah. And Kenny then gives them the fake presents. They are somewhat shocked that these presents don't have anything on them, but of course then he gives them something actually to use, which I think is really nice. You know, I like that he does that. You know, he isn't a dick. But the reason why I feel like this is another episode where Spenny would have lost is because Spenny's idea, for one thing, is just not as entertaining as Kenny's. Let's be perfectly honest. You know, I think Spenny kind of shot himself in the foot by not doing his in the morning and Kenny's in the afternoon. But even then, I feel like Kenny would have won anyway. Spenny's idea is a very formulaic, very, you know, it feels like something you do at a school trip, you know, and of course he even says, you know, the kids have to learn something, you know, and whereas Kenny, you know, he's just giving these kids freedom, you know, and as a kid, you know, you would want freedom. Kids want freedom. They want to be free and happy and fun and all that. Kenny knows what to do. Spenny doesn't. And so Spenny fucks up in that aspect, but he also fucks up because he yells at the kids at one point. He like yells at them and says, "Oh well, you know," he says, "Oh well, should we just go back because you clearly aren't, you know, paying attention and all that." And he gets really frustrated and upset and all that. And I think to myself, no, he doesn't understand that this is a competition where kids are meant to like you. Yelling at them and saying, you know, yeah, your generation doesn't know this shit and that shit. It's just wrong, you know. Kids are not going to vote for him. And then, of course, the third reason is the kids get scared. The kids get scared by the pirate at one point, and one of them cries their eyes out, which completely backfires against Spenny's plan of having a pirate come off and, you know, entertain the kids. And so, you know, and to make matters worse, you know, one of the kids even says, pirates don't exist. I mean, of course they do, technically. I mean, look at what's happening in Yemen at the moment, but like, or Somalia, but like, or even pick up a history book. But, you know, these kids aren't stupid. And the problem with Spenny is that he thinks kids are stupid. He thinks they're retarded, you know, whereas Kenny knows they're not stupid. He's just indulging in their, you know, happiest fantasies by letting them do whatever the fuck they want, eat whatever the fuck they want, be entertained, you know. He knows they're not stupid, whereas Spenny actively does think they're stupid, and he even like grumbles about how this generation is, you know, turning into Kennys and all that shit. And it's like, yeah, you know, I feel like Spenny would have lost regardless, even if Kenny, you know, didn't necessarily bribe them or didn't, you know, go first. I feel like Kenny would have won regardless because he knew exactly what to do, whereas Spenny, you know, he just made one fuck up after the other and for some reason felt like he was going to win because he thinks that he's smarter than everyone else in the room, while also thinking that kids are stupid, which they're not. So of course Kenny wins, and Spenny's punishment in the humiliation is to bob for apples in Kenny's toilet, which is Oh, horrible humiliation. But it is not the worst toilet-related humiliation. That comes much later in a later series, which, even just thinking about it makes me shudder. I am quite a germaphobe, in case you don't know. I do not like that sort of stuff. Even though some of my favourite episodes of Kenny vs. Spenny includes dumping the pants, which is quite ironic considering I hate, icky stuff. But, at the same time, I do find that hilarious. But, yeah, you do kids like more. Overall, I do think this is quite a dull episode, even though I've been talking about this for quite a long time, although it's mostly because I think that Spenny would have lost regardless. I do think it is quite a mediocre episode. It's not very interesting or entertaining by a stretch of the imagination. It's just, the humiliation's good, though. The humiliation is very good. Who is the strongest? Now, this is an interesting episode because we get an episode later on, which is who is the better boxer. And it's just funny that we have both these episodes in one series. It's like the kids episode. You got parent and then kids immediately after. Go figure. So, who is the strongest? Spenny, would never win against Kenny in a weightlifting competition. So Kenny suggests competing against, Spenny that competes against his sister. His sister appears quite a lot in the series. Even her son appears in one of the episodes. In the, which one is it? Viral video. So Kenny, he tricks Spenny throughout the whole episode into thinking that, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Miram. I think that's how you say it, Miram. Miram into thinking that she basically is taking steroids and all this stuff. Spenny, gets worried because he thinks, oh God, I'm going to lose this weight competition. To make matters worse, Kenny orchestrates that. He has these women come in to abuse Spenny because Spenny has said some sexist comments and all that shit and thinks that he's going to beat a woman and all that. So Spenny, he starts freaking out. And eventually Spenny forfeits by just saying that he's claimed an injury. When in reality he hasn't. He's just too chicken shit. And he's been tricked this entire time. So Spenny then receives an atomic wedgie as humiliation. Now this episode... I've been talking so long, my throat is starting to hurt. There's still more episodes, shit. This episode, well, I've said before, the worst episodes of Kenny vs. Spenny are the ones that feel staged, and this episode does feel somewhat staged. A part of me feels like Spenny is not that fucking stupid, but then I remember, yeah, he is. And not only that, I'm not really a fan of competitions where both of them refuse to do it. And this problem persists quite a lot with these sport-related competitions, where they both refuse to do it, basically, because Kenny doesn't want to do it, which is understandable, but yeah, kind of a lackluster episode. I'm sorry, I don't really have much to say. It's unique. It's very unique. Alright, coughing fit over, we now move on to the next episode, which is Who Makes a Convincing Woman? The most convincing woman. I put this on my worst episodes list, and I still agree with that. Maybe it might be lower because there's some worse ones out there. So they both dress up in drag. They both get judged by women, except for one, which is Spenny's uncle, who's brought over by Kenny to try and trick Spenny. Now, to give credit where credit due, Spenny does stay in character in this. Usually, Spenny is the type of person that would just never break, that would always break character. This is the only time he doesn't, which is quite funny to think about. But as a result, it kind of ruins the competition. With Imitate, for example, where they're dressed up as each other, Spenny breaks character immediately upon seeing, Kenny just sing about his grandfather molesting him or eating fake shit in a toilet. Spenny will break character like on the whim, and you know he does it in wrestling as well. He breaks character there, like he screams about what the hell's going on, why is everyone just attacking him all of a sudden, which ultimately makes him lose. You know, in play and all that, like he continues to break character. He breaks, like he can never truly just stay in character. He has to break character because he gets upset and flustered. And in this episode, you know, you can tell that Kenny's trying to do that here, but it doesn't work out. And it kind of makes for a very boring episode as a result. I'm also shocked that they picked Spenny as the most convincing woman, because he doesn't even look like a woman. He genuinely, that is the worst fucking makeup and wig I've ever seen. Like, even in terms of, like, if you're doing a drag thing, that looks shit. That looks absolutely fucking shit. Like, how the fuck does Kenny lose on looks, you know, when Spenny looks like that? But I guess, you know, at the same time, they did see through Kenny trying to manipulate and cheat and all that. But then again, aren't women always manipulative? But I digress. Yeah, this is just such a very boring episode on its own. Like, the idea could have worked. I feel like if they like went out in the streets or did some stuff as well, like people being tricked by these two in drag, it probably could have worked much better. It would have been more entertaining. You know, I bet you in that case Spenny would have lost massively, but at the same time, I feel like I don't know. Like, I feel like there was a million ways they could have done this, and it would have been better. This is still a shit episode, absolutely shit. The humiliation is quite funny, but it's also pretty Kenny is forced to walk in the streets, you know, in particular a place where prostitutes are usually, while wearing his drag costume. It's like, yeah, this episode honestly is kind of, yeah, it's just not very good. It's not a very good episode, unfortunately. It's very bad. It's shit. It's awful. It's boring. That's the thing. It's painfully boring. Up next is who is the better actor. Now, Spenny writes a monologue where he is a prize fighter that loses a match. You know, he's trying to make it based on like his own experiences, and even like when you hear him speak at the end during his play, like he's saying, you know, how much you can always tell this is him reflecting on the show itself. And you know, to give credit due, Spenny's actually decent here, which is shocking considering the fact that Spenny is a terrible actor. I mean, I've had the misfortune of witnessing his single white Spenny. Oh boy, I watched like a tiny bit of it before I had to turn it off because it was so bad. It's genuinely one of the single worst TV shows I have ever seen. It is that bad. I implore everyone to watch it. And then try and find that IMDb review by Spenny under a fake name, which is clearly Spenny, saying how brilliant the show is. Oh god, lol cow behaviour again. So I digress. So Kenny does this like really arty-farty one where, you know, he actually has an actor do the thing instead. He's behind this mirror and he's like got this mask. He comes out, he's in this brown cloak and he like waves about and all that. While Kenny's actually behind the mirror, he's not actually there. But Kenny, to ensure his victory, gives Spenny a flat tire so that he couldn't watch the performance, because Spenny would know immediately that, you know, it's not Kenny doing the acting, it's someone else. For one thing, he probably looks at the finger, which, by the way, I never knew about the finger until the obese episode. I don't know if anyone else noticed that, like, his missing finger. Like, literally, the obese episode was the first time I ever noticed that. Like, I would be shit, like, trying to spot the real Kenny. So, yeah, Spenny loses, despite actually putting up a decent performance. Like, I'll give credit where due. They both do a good job here. Spenny, of course, gets humiliated. He gets eggs thrown at him, including one that is a hard-boiled egg, to show that he's a bad actor. Overall, this episode is actually not that bad. It's surprisingly a very decent episode. Now, is it entertaining? Is it brilliant? It's on the mediocre side. It's one of those, like, okay, you can probably watch it once or twice, and you wouldn't find it that entertaining, but you wouldn't find it like that boring either. I think Kenny's plan is quite clever. I like the idea that both of them are actually doing a good job here. They both they both performed well, and they both are actually competing, as opposed to Kenny just forfeiting or purposely getting Spenny trapped somewhere so he can't do it at all, which is quite fun to think about. I also think this is the same place they did the concert episode, which I think they must have used this a lot for their episodes here and there, but I digress. This is an okay episode. It's okay, it's decent. It's definitely one of the more, I mean, it's not necessarily fair because he does cheat, but it's one of the more fairer competitions where both of them are trying to win, and they both have a chance of losing, both have a chance of winning. It's really just a case of who she picks in the end, and she obviously picks Kenny, despite the fact that he's cheating. But hey, it's a fun one. Up next is who is the best male stripper. Now, this one is almost like a prototype torture episode, in the sense that Kenny immediately says he's going to purposely lose the competition. He doesn't want to do it, but he's going to make Spenny get humiliated while doing it. Because let's be honest, now Spenny being forced to strip, be a male stripper, it's just, it's cringeworthy. Now, obviously, Kenny, midway through the episode, does have a bit of a change of heart, because he he does start to think, maybe I should compete in this and actually get rid of defeat Spenny once for all. Of course he doesn't. He still kind of lazies about. Spenny does a better performance overall and he wins, and it's this episode is a kind of a mixed bag, because Torture is a good episode in the sense that it's so painfully obvious that Kenny is humiliating Spenny doing this. He knows he's going to lose the episode, but he's putting Spenny through hell while doing it. Whereas this one, he's trying to put Spenny through hell, but he's also kind of has regrets and thinks, okay, maybe I should try and compete actually. And he gets a little bit upset that Spenny doesn't forfeit the competition, which he wanted him to do. But yeah, at the same time, you can kind of tell that he wanted Spenny to just be humiliated, and that's kind of what he did. He kind of got his own way. That said, Spenny, the humiliation he gives Kenny is, it's painful. He uses a pair of pliers on his chest hair and he rips it out. Oof. Really painful stuff. Spenny, when he wants to, he can be really sadistic with his humiliations. There's one later on in Bigger Balls, which, is absolutely horrendous. But yeah, it's a okay episode. It's definitely one of the more forgettable episodes. As I said, it's sort of like a proto torture episode in the sense that Kenny is forfeiting straight away just so that he can humiliate Spenny throughout the whole episode, which is, of course, what happens in a way. Up next is who is the better figure skater. Now this one is once again another one of these sport related competitions which Kenny just forfeits from the beginning. Basically, whenever there's a sport related competition, Kenny doesn't like doing it. He says in the commentary all the time, he hated doing these competitions which Spenny really wanted to do. Spenny really wanted to do badminton. He really wanted to do tennis. He wanted to do all this stuff. Kenny did not want to do it. And with Series 1, I feel like Spenny had a lot more say with production, because later on you barely get any of these sort of competition at all. in Series 6, you get two of them, which is badminton, which eventually became Who Can, and what is it? Basketball coach, which is I mean, that's a hilarious episode on its own, but the deleted scene for it, the suitcase rant, is even better. But I digress. Like, this is another example of, like, Kenny, he doesn't want to do it. So what he does is he breaks his leg. He falls over in the ice skating rink and he breaks his leg, and the bone is sticking out. It is horrific. It is horrible. Except for the fact that, let's just say, a few days prior, he had some makeup done, which allowed him to create this fake broken leg. And throughout this episode, he basically tortures Spenny. Like, he knows he's got Spenny wrapped around his finger, so he humiliates him. He forces Spenny to do all this stuff to him. Spenny, he gets quite frustrated with Kenny after a while. And, of course, Kenny's doing it on purpose. He's purposely prodding Spenny with a stick, basically. Why he has a perfectly fine leg. He's just getting Spenny to be a slave. So Spenny eventually goes out, and Kenny decides he's going to leave for the weekend, and he leaves a little message. And he, throughout the whole episode, he references a bird. I forgot what it was called, but this type of bird, it feigns a broken leg and injury, when in reality it's actually, trying to trick predators and what have you, and prey, so it can get it. And that's what Kenny does the whole time. He writes it on the thing, and Spenny erupts in anger. Like, he kicks down this wheelchair, and he's angry. He's so angry, in fact, he urinates on Kenny's bed. He basically wins by default, despite the fact that Kenny is nowhere to be seen to be humiliated. So yeah, it's a it's quite a fun little subversion of the competition. But at the same time, I think to myself, I am one of those people that do prefer competitions. That said, I do prefer this over Who Can, because at least this one had a clever scheme, whereas Who Can was just gags, and that was it. It just wasn't as entertaining. Who Can Survive in the Woods the Longest is perhaps the most rawest episode of Kenny vs. Spenny's history, in fact. This is like the only episode where things really heat up and, feel very raw and realistic. A lot of the episodes, even though a lot of the show is unscripted, a lot of the episodes do have a formulaic sort of plot, so to speak. Whether it's like Octopus, where the idea is Spenny's on drugs, Kenny's trying to convince him to take it off, shenanigans happens, and eventually he takes it off, and he goes to like a river at the end as well. It's like hilariously, poetic in a bizarre sense. But drunk, Spenny is intoxicated, Kenny is drinking fake beer, Kenny is trying to provoke Spenny into vomiting, Spenny passes out. Eventually, Kenny decides he's going to have to take things into his own hands and make Spenny vomit, although he's actually the one vomiting, etc. There's always a storyline, so to speak. Even this series so far, you've had Chef, for example. Spenny thinks that he should cheat this time instead of Kenny, so he tries cheating, but it backfires. Kenny tries bringing in Wolffish. Wolffish annoys both of them. His plan backfires, but he manages to convince Spenny to take off the cuffs. There's always this sort of like storyline in every episode. There's always this sort of like plot, so to speak. But at the same time, there's never been one episode which has felt so raw, so real that, it's pretty hard to come up with a story. Because of how raw and realistic it is. And this is what Woods does. Woods is quite an underrated episode in a way, because not a lot of people talk about it, despite the fact that this is like probably the only time you see both of them really yell at each other, really get angry, and then have a full-on fist fight. Spenny is basically tortured by Kenny the whole time when they're in the woods. They're not allowed any real equipment. Kenny is purposely got stuff in his pockets to try and like create fires and be, in a better location, but Spenny is constantly like over his shoulder, constantly around him, and he's getting pissed off with that. He doesn't want Spenny near him, but then Spenny keeps, because he doesn't want his plans to be ruined. But at the same time, Spenny doesn't trust Kenny, obviously. He does cheat all the time. Spenny, wants to try and beat Kenny, and Kenny doesn't want that to happen. He wants to just torture Spenny to the point that he just gives up, and he tries to do that, but of course, as a result, tensions flare up. They both start yelling at each other. They both start getting really pissed off at each other, and eventually culminates into Spenny just whacking Kenny, and Kenny hitting Spenny back, and they basically wrestle each other to the ground. It's like a full-on fight that the production team have to get involved and pull them apart. And it is brutal, it is brutal. In many ways, this is like the first time in the whole series that we see Spenny's like anger issues start to flare up a bit, because for those who don't know, Spenny has massive anger issues throughout the whole show, and this is probably the first time we see it happen. He full on rages and goes all psychotic towards poor old Kenny, and Kenny is sort of on the defensive in a way. Very, very tense episode as a result. Very good episode as well. Like, I say very good. It's not like brilliant in every sense of the word. It's a very good episode in the sense that it has a good, interesting idea. And I feel like this is sort of like the proto homeless episode. So for those who don't know, the homeless episode, they were homeless and walking about in the streets. This is sort of the same thing. They're homeless, but they're walking about in the woods. I do feel like the only issue is basically what happens. Because they have a fight, they basically both forfeit because they realised things were getting too heated. And so they're humiliated by the crew instead, and this is a double humiliation. This is, I think, the first draw we've had. Kenny and Spenny are forced to French kiss each other, and they have to do it for like 5 seconds, which is quite a funny humiliation for both of them, honestly, all things considered. This is a very underrated episode. Not a lot of people talk about this one, and I feel like it should be, because it is probably the most rawest episode of the whole show, given what happens. It's also the first time we see Spenny's anger problems at its forefront, which, is only going to increase as time goes by. This episode is another really fun idea, I think, which is the first one to use their arms losers. Kenny and Spenny, they have their arms wrapped up, but before the competition, they basically plaster the house with tape and all this other crap to try and, prepare themselves for the competition. They do so quite well. Spenny's got all his stuff laid out, which, of course, Kenny finds out about. So as soon as their arms are wrapped up, they basically both go ahead and Kenny decides to just ruin all Spenny's handiwork. He, messes around with all his stuff. He steps on all the food. He spits in his water bottles. It's really disgusting stuff, all things considered. Spenny gets really fucking angry and he starts kicking him. And by the way, something that I noticed is that Kenny technically loses the competition very early on. And the reason why is because when Spenny kicks Kenny down, his arms unfold and he actually holds on to the chair. So technically speaking, Kenny lost this almost immediately. But because, obviously Spenny was being violent, I guess it didn't count. So they start to try and use their mouths for everything. They try to use like sticks to try and press buttons. They try to use straws to take sips out of things. They try to use tape on doors to pull things open with their teeth. They try to use their feet as well. It is funny seeing the ways Kenny fucks around with Spenny. Like, he shuts the door at one point, locking Spenny out. I don't know how he did that without his arms, but hey, who cares? And Spenny, is forced to wait outside. They're both looking at each other. They also act like, alpacas in this episode. Like, they constantly spit at each other. The llamas. They're like spitting at each other constantly. It's just hilarious. But regardless, Spenny and Kenny, there's this moment where Kenny decides he's gonna get some help, and this help is the type of help which, I gotta say, quite an ingenious move from Kenny's point of view. I gotta say, like, really ingenious. So for those who don't know, he gets a midget. Ties him up to the front of him, and the midget uses like those recycling claws to pick up litter, that sort of stuff. And he starts fucking around with Spenny even more. He's using him as arms, basically, so he can do all this stuff. It's really beneficial for him. But, of course, Spenny, he's still not giving up. To give credit for Judas, Spenny's trying not to give up. Then we come to the ending, and this ending is... I don't know what to say about this ending. This ending's awkward, in my opinion. The reason why I find it awkward is the fact that Kenny and... it turns out it feels staged. That's what I mean. It feels staged. Spenny suddenly just opens his arms up to catch his guitar, which is being dropped from the rooftop. And yet you can't see the thing that he has around him lying around anywhere in the background. And he just suddenly gets his arms out, despite the fact that, would have taken a little bit of squirming and effort to do in order to do it. Like, I don't know, the ending feels a little bit possibly staged. Maybe there was a different cut, which just wasn't good, like they did with, First One to Touch the Ground, in which they had to refilm the ending bit because it didn't look good, so they redid it. I don't know, it just, the ending feels a little bit off. So the humiliation for this one is that Spenny is forced to smell Kenny's sweaty armpits after he does a bit of exercise on an exercise track, and yeah, basically it's a very good episode, honestly. It's not necessarily just okay, it's very good. I like these sort of episodes where it's something so bizarre but at the same time very simple. Not using your arms, so you have to be tied up, and you have all this like inventive ways of just fucking around, etc. I think it's a very interesting idea, all things considered. So yes, I think this is a good episode. Overall, decent. So the court case episode is one of those episodes which I was debating on when back when I did my top 10 best and worst episodes of Kenny vs. Spenny. This one was one of those I was debating on putting on the worst list, but I never really did because I thought it's not god-awful, but it's just not brilliant. It's a very boring episode, a very dull episode, but at the same time, I don't know, there's something about the actual courtroom drama bit which I kind of find kind of entertaining. The way that Kenny just fucking humiliates Spenny throughout this whole, court case. Especially because, the way that Spenny, throughout the competition, Spenny is quite confident that he's going to win. And, Kenny doesn't really have anything. He's just pranking Spenny. He thinks he's got like a bug on his phone and he doesn't. And he, makes Spenny admit that he's been having phone sex and all that stuff, which is hilarious. And it's hilarious as well, like during the court case itself, he calls in all these witnesses admitting that Spenny owns money. And of course, we know that Spenny is like that in real life. There's quite a lot of scenarios that Kenny has laid out where he has demanded money and never given it back. Which I think, is quite telling that this is like this is sort of like not necessarily staged, but a very televised way of displaying that side of Spenny. Look at Wolffish, for example. That's another example of it. But, even like with his ex-wife and stuff like that, Spenny has a track record of being a greedy bastard. It's why you should never really feel sympathy for Spenny, because when you look into his real life stuff, you realise, wow, this guy's a cunt. Like, he really is. So yeah, in terms of the court case episode, a lot of people hate this episode. A lot of people find it boring. I do too. I do find the courtroom, like, humiliation of Spenny quite funny to watch. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's kind of a boring episode. In terms of the humiliation, being spat by Kenny, I mean, disgusting, absolutely horrendous. Good humiliation, though. Good humiliation, even if I think it is one of the most disgusting and horrific, like, humiliations you could have done. Like, getting spat on, that's disgusting. But yeah, overall, a very dull episode. I was tempted to put this on my worst. I never did in the end because I didn't think it was that bad, but I also can understand why a lot of people really don't like this one. It's a very dull episode. The best part is really him confessing to the phone sex stuff and the humiliation in the courtroom. That's about it. Who can live in a van the longest? Holy shit. Is this another episode which I wanted to put on my worst list because I really don't like this episode. So basically the first to lose leave the van loses. Kenny is sat at the back of the van. He's got all this stuff with him and he's just having fun while Spenny is driving. Spenny doesn't like the fact that Kenny could drive at any second because Kenny is very volatile when it comes to driving. Spenny constantly gets annoyed by Kenny throughout the whole episode as they're stuck in the back of the van. Kenny doesn't make anything, easier for Spenny. He just continues to push the buttons, continue to humiliate and aggravate. Spenny being Spenny, he basically goes ahead and thinks, if I just hold on for long enough, Kenny will get bored. Eventually, of course, he gets too tired and he tries going in the front of the van. He obviously takes the keys with him, so he ensures that Kenny can't move. Kenny, of course, has his backup keys anyway, so he's about to drive, but the van dies. The van dies, and what we get next is really fucking annoying in terms of Spenny behaviour. Kenny tries asking for help. Spenny is just acting like like Kenny did earlier, being loud and obnoxious. But whereas Kenny is entertaining, Spenny's just very fucking annoying. And Spenny, just tries to get people away. Luckily, someone does try to fix the van, give it a jump start, but the van is still dead and nothing works. So it turns out that all the electric equipment in the back of the van that he used actually drained the battery, and he basically fucked things up from the start. Because it's a tie, there's no humiliation, and this is a very fucking boring episode. I don't know what else to say. Very bad episode, very boring. The episode idea, I don't even think the episode idea is that good either. Like, you're so isolated and so crippled by what you can do inside a van that you don't really have much to do. So, of course, you get a really boring, dull episode. Disappointing, really, because there's no humiliation. There's no, forced humiliation upon both of them. It's a bullshit episode. Just very bullshit, very annoying, very boring. Nothing better to say. And finally, after 26 fucking episodes, 27 if you count the pilot, we are now on the Who is the Better Boxer. Spenny and Kenny are about to box. This sounds like a great idea. However, Kenny refuses to fight Spenny, so he basically locks him into a closet the whole time. He boards it up. He manages to get Spenny inside, tricking him into saying, oh, well, this is just a thing to play around in. And then he pushes him in and locks the door. Blocks it with other stuff as well. Spenny is, of course, angry while Kenny goes off to enjoy himself. He's able to run out the competition, and yeah. This is, this is a fun idea. I will say this. This is the good part of the episode where you see Spenny trapped in the thing. Kenny, going about as he's enjoying himself. He does develop a guilty conscience, though. which, again, I feel kind of is somewhat staged. I feel like, there must have been something else going on there. Kenny eventually goes back to Spenny, and he tries to reason with Spenny, saying, I'm going to let you out, but please don't do that. He's all protected, he's all prepared. As Spenny, says, okay, I will. He grabs like a bucket full of urine and feces, and as soon as the door opens, he throws it at Kenny, and you just see the absolute anger in Spenny as he punches a wall aggressively. He's like really angry, yelling. Kenny is screaming, and it's all disgusting. So now we go into the actual boxing match. This is going to be a really fun battle between two best friends. It'll be like in Dirty Sanchez when Pritchard and Deason had their own boxing match, which lasted one round. Well, at least that's what it showed on camera. However, Kenny doesn't show up. Spenny wins by default, and he's then forced to urinate his pants. Kenny is humiliation. Fuck me, what a boring ending. It would have been more entertaining to see these two fight. I will be a bit honest. I think having the whole, him trapped in the room would have been fun. I think it would have been fun to have these two actually box it out. It would have been fun to see these two actually fight, and who knows, maybe something unexpected happen. Maybe Kenny gets one hit on Spenny and knocks him out. Maybe Spenny does beat the shit out of Kenny. Who knows? But no, he becomes too afraid to do it, and it's like, for fuck's sake, it's like all this build up for just a wet fart, a whimper, and it fucking sucks as a result. One of the things that I like about later seasons is that they do introduce more rules, in the sense that you have to do this. By series 6, of course, because they had no real rules, or they knew that it was going to end, they said fuck the rules and just did their own thing. I just feel like this is just such a cop-out. Really disappointing ending. I will say the best part is, of course, Spenny being trapped in the thing, and his reaction to when he's let out is hilarious. But honestly, this should have been an actual fight. A good example of an episode which is very similar to this is the arm wrestling competition. Kenny refuses to do it. Yeah, well, I say Kenny refuses to. He goes after Spencer Rice. He finds Spencer Rice and he does an arm wrestling with him. This is Spencer Rice, by the way, who is just a teenage child. Nothing major like that, and it's such a funny gag, he's competing with Spencer Rice, isn't he? Because it's not actually Spenny. Spenny is left alone, he's bored, and he's not happy about it. But by the time that Kenny returns, they actually do have an arm wrestling match. And guess what? Kenny beats Spenny immediately. And Spenny still fucking lost. And it's that is a good, that is the episode that this episode should have been. It should have been, him fucking around with Spenny being trapped the whole time, but then being released. And then we had the fight. That would have been more interesting. But no, instead it just feels like a massive disappointment. That is what this entire episode is. It's just one big, hype just to be disappointed. Very, very disappointing episode. A very disappointing end to Series 1 as a whole. Overall, when it comes to Series 1 of Kenny vs. Spenny, I've said it already, this suffers from first series syndrome, in the sense that this whole series is the first series. As a result, everything is very stilted, everything is very awkward, everything is a very, will this work, will this not work? They're trying to test the water, so to speak. I think the problem with this series in particular is that it has way too many episodes, and a lot of the episodes do not work. I've already mentioned already that the van episode, for example, just doesn't work at all. It's a very boring and lifeless episode. The court case one is very boring. These are, Chef, it feels very formulaic and staged. It's just, you have all these episodes and a lot of them just do not work in the end. Whereas a lot of them do, don't get me wrong, you got Parent, which is hilarious. Who Does She Like More, which is also hilarious. Blindfold, Handcuffed, of course, stay up the longest. All really good episodes, but when you have a vast majority which is just sort of mediocre, it does struggle a bit. You know, Series 1 to a lot of people is a very weak series because it is very much a trying to find their way sort of series. You know, it's like with Series 6. A lot of people are a little bit mixed on the series overall because, you know, with Series 6's problem, it was the last series, so of course everything was kind of like, you can kind of tell, and of course when you hear that behind the scenes things were just not very good at all, and they didn't enjoy themselves, it kind of dampens the mood a bit. Series 1, you know, there was hope. there was hope for Spenny. But again, this is just a very dull series, all things considered, but it's still very good. I think, obviously, later on, things will be much better. Series 2, for example, the way it begins with Drinkmore, massive improvement from the get-go. But, of course, you know, you do hit the high marks, which is Series 4, just perfection almost, and Series 5 very closely so. But yeah, first series syndrome of everything is basically testing the waters. Nothing much more to say. It's an okay series, all things considered, but it's not perfect. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this review of Series 1 of Kenny vs. Spenny. Hopefully I'll get through Series 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6 later on. Who knows? Obviously, you know, those are my thoughts on each individual episode. If I were to say that the best ones were, of course, number 1 is the Who Can Stay Up the Longest. I think that is fantastic. Parent, very good. And honestly, when it comes to the third place, I don't know which one to choose. I like Who Does She Like more because it's just hilarious. I like Handcuffed, and I like Blindfold. Like, all three of those are really good, and it's I don't know. In terms of the worst, Van is definitely a really bad. Cow is very boring. Chef, I still really don't like. Court Case still sucks, and Convincing Woman, definitely one of the worst, if not the worst. So yeah, overall, most of the episodes are okay for the most part, but they are quite at the same time mediocre. They're not as good as they will be, you know. But you gotta keep in mind this is like the first series, testing wars, etc. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.